are vigorously championed by American politicians.
I understand Israel's desire to protect itself.
I think what the Israelis are doing is very important.
Israel has no choice but to take military action.
The Israelis are doing the only thing they can possibly do to defend their population.
The missile firings into Israel, I think, brought a proper response.
What do you know about the Arab-Israeli conflict?
Honestly, not much. I am Jewish, so I have been around family and friends debating the subject, but I kind of choose to take a little bit more of like a outside listening perspective.
Like they promised like a Jewish state.
You're right.
And a Muslim state. Mm-hmm. So they obviously formed Israel, but Palestine is still not like an actual country yet, even though that was one of the terms of the agreement.
They're like two groups, and I think they're like both different religious groups, and they're like fighting for.
Is it like Jerusalem or something? I don't
know. For like the land, and then that's kind of where all the conflict started.
Do you think that the media representation of the conflict is skewed in any direction?
Stuff. And, the impression that I get is a lot of candidates, maybe they're a little bit reluctant to talk about the plight of the Palestinian and all those people who live in the West Bank, etc. Maybe because it's not a very popular issue. It's something that steps on people's toes.
Well, I feel like typically we present the Middle East in sort of a negative light in general, but overall I don't really have any pressing opinions on it.
Yeah, in America.
I have no idea which one they would favor, but I feel like
it's definitely like the one that they probably have more like economic relations and ties with. I'm not sure which one it is specifically, but
alright.
Yeah.
I think you're going to have biased media on both ends. I wouldn't say that I've seen one side of the conflict being promoted in media, social media, or in any form more than the other, though.
Okay, thank you.
Discrimination and like stereotyping, like very much so.
Who would you say receives the negative end of the stereotype most often? Israelis?
Yes.
What percentage of Palestine would you estimate is occupied by Israeli forces?
30%.
50%? 50%?
30%.
Alright.
So in 1896, Herzl spread the idea of modern-day Zionism because he thought that there's no way that Jews can exist harmoniously without having their own state. In 1917, the British wrote the Balfour Declaration. After the fall of the Ottomans, the land that was Palestine wasn't under anyone's control anymore, so the French and British split it up. They declared Palestine a new home for the Jews, even though they were people who were already settled there.
So from 1926 to 1929, the first Arab revolts happened. Scholars such as Kushner and Solomon challenge mainstream Zionist arguments that these revolts were anti-Semitic. They argue that it was because people who were moving there were interrupting with the people who were already living there, i.e. the Arab population that had been settled there for thousands of years. So while this was happening, tens of thousands of Jews were migrating to Israel because of the British proclamation, but also because of Christian support that said that Jews needed to migrate because of things that had been written in the Old Testament. Of course, World War II happened and the Holocaust occurred, so there was a lot of sympathy for Jews from European states.
In 1948, the United Nations created the State of Israel in the Assembly Resolution 181. In their proposal, they created a two-state solution where Palestine and Israel would share the land. Following the creation of Israel, the Israelis were involved in the Six-Day War, in which they defeated Egypt, Lebanon, and Syria, and gained the United States support after the Vietnam Syndrome.
During this period, the media coverage became more biased. Edward Said explained that there was violence from both sides, but more directed towards Palestinian civilians. This contradicts the media's overwhelming coverage of Palestinian attacks on Israel. It also leaves a serious absence by not showing the hardships Palestinians face due to occupation. This, in turn, leads to confusing representation of the conflict. In 2006, Time magazine put the Palestinian-Israeli conflict in religious context by inferring Jews were promised the land of Israel by God. They did this through glorification of Israeli military power and efficiency in its victory after the Six-Day War. This article also portrays Palestinian airplane hijackings in Israel, which creates fear and perpetuates the terrorist threat trope. The absences in this article included a lack of coverage of Israeli military occupation of Palestine. It also references the Munich Olympic hostage attack as another example of Palestinian terrorist attacks without the context of Israeli military occupation.
Israel must reserve the right to defend itself. And after all, that's the very purpose of the Jewish state, to restore to the Jewish people control over our destiny.
But Netanyahu's controversial reading of history, even his fight to preserve the state of Israel, are questioned by many of Judaism's own religious authorities.
And Zionism is a new movement, a relatively new movement, a transformation from the religion into a base, materialistic, nationalistic movement to have a piece of land. Which is...
Hi, Devin. So, can you please explain to me what SAFE does to challenge the dominant representations and understandings of the Arab-Israeli conflict on campus?
Okay. Events, primarily around education. Let's try to shift the focus and try and provide the narrative that's never shown, which is the Palestinian narrative, particularly because our society as a whole and our government has always, for much of its history as Israel has existed, presented a one-sided or Zionist narrative.
As SAFE is we're the only group that ever shows the Palestinian narrative, the Palestinian culture, and really gives our side of things. So just in general, I think our existence is kind of counter-hegemonic in that way.
What counter-hegemonic news sources or media sources do you follow to just track the current events in the Middle East?
But Al Jazeera is kind of like a basic one. I follow Palestinian Arabic news sources. An agency, the Shabaka news agency, Ramallah news agency, and a couple others I can't remember right now. I have an iGaza app on my phone, so I get reports every day to my phone and stuff like that. So pretty up to date on most things. And then